Support for this episode comes from the Dillerteen Tikkun Olam Awards. Applications and nominations are now open for the Dillerteen Tikkun Olam Awards. These awards honor up to 15 Jewish teens from across the United States with an award of $36,000 each to recognize their impact and leadership to repair the world. Nominate a teen leader today, or they can apply directly by January 9th, 2025. Learn more at dillerteenawards.org. A brief note before this episode. It and many of our upcoming episodes were recorded before the recent U.S. presidential election. We, like so many of our listeners and partner organizations, are processing the reality of its result and envisioning the ways that we can best act and respond in the immediate and longer-term future. If it will feel strange to listen to a conversation so shortly after the election that does not connect to American or global politics, it's totally okay for you to come back to this episode at a later date. If a conversation about the Jewish present and future, not so connected to contemporary politics, would feel like a welcome reprieve in this moment, we hope that this episode will be the perfect fit.
This is Judaism Unbound, episode 456, Lehrhaus, where Jewish learning meets Tavern. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And our guest today is Charlie Schwartz, the co-founder of Lehrhaus, a Boston area establishment that's a combination Jewish tavern and House of Learning. Lehrhaus was founded in 2023 by Charlie Schwartz and his co-founder, writer Joshua Four, and it aims to be a new kind of Jewish space, something we haven't really seen before, at least not in the United States. It's considered a top restaurant, for example, having been named one of Esquire magazine's best new restaurants of 2023, the only kosher restaurant ever to have made that list. And it's committed to being a not-for-profit house of learning on a mission to put gathering, joy, and text at the center of Jewish life through exceptional hospitality and Jewish learning. Now that Lehrhaus has been up and running for over a year, we're excited to hear about how it's going. But before we do, a quick word on some upcoming Judaism Unbound programming. This year, we've been excited to be offering a Friday night experience called Shabbat Unbound. What makes Shabbat Unbound unique is that it's a Shabbat service that's been going on since August and that will continue going on all the way through next July. It's a 12-month-long experience of Kabbalat Shabbat, welcoming Shabbat, gathering once per month via Zoom, in which we are journeying through the typical Friday night service at our own pace. Instead of rolling super quickly through a playlist of 15 or 20 prayers, as many prayer services or synagogues do every week, we hone in on a single prayer each time, connecting to it deeply and in multiple ways through song, group conversation, words of Torah, art, and more. Our next Shabbat Unbound gathering, number 4 of the 12, will be on Friday evening, November 22nd, and is focused on the Lechadodi prayer. You can sign up by heading to judaismunbound.com/Shabbat. It's not too late to join. Don't worry if you haven't made it to the first 3, and we hope that you'll be a part of this amazing experience. And now for our conversation with Charlie Schwartz. Lehrhaus, which Charlie Schwartz co-founded and leads, is an award-winning Jewish tavern and house of learning. The first Lehrhaus location is in the Boston area, but they're hoping to soon expand it to other locations around the United States, and maybe the world. Charlie Schwartz and a team of seasoned restaurant professionals and Jewish educators work together to create experiences at the intersection of learning, community, and hospitality. Prior to founding Lehrhaus, Charlie Schwartz directed Brandeis University's Bima and Genesis programs, and he worked for Hillel International as Senior Director of Jewish Education. Charlie Schwartz has rabbinic ordination from the Jewish Theological Seminary, as well as a master's degree in education. So let's learn about Lehrhaus. Charlie Schwartz, welcome to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you.
It's so great to be here.
So I want to start with the dream. I think that one way of thinking about Lehrhaus is it's a tavern and house of learning in Boston. What's that? I think that'll be our second question, or maybe you'll address it in this first question. But what I was curious about is, like, what's the dream? What is the way, when you're creating a totally new kind of Jewish institution in the world? Like, I think before Lehrhaus, I'm not aware that there has been a tavern and house of learning. What is the picture of the Jewish future, in 50 years from now, that involves that not just being a place in the Boston area, but a place in, every Jewish community? And what's the new world that Lehrhaus is part of?
Yeah, so the origins of Lehrhaus as a Jewish tavern and house of learning, it really started. It wasn't like a 50-year vision. It was like a year to 2-year vision. It was my co-founder Josh Foyer and I talking still during the pandemic and kind of imagining what the world might look like after the pandemic. And we imagined a world where people were thirsty for in-person encounters and connecting with community. There are a lot of great Jewish spaces where that can happen, synagogues and JCCs and places like that. But if you're not tapped into those communities, there's not a lot of options for you. And there are not a lot of great kind of public Jewish spaces. So we started iterating and imagining like what a great public Jewish space that puts the best of the Jewish world forward, amazing Jewish learning, amazing Jewish food, the stories of the Jewish people, and creates a place where people can connect and gather, what that might look like. And we eventually landed on this idea of like of a Jewish tavern house of learning, pulling on two older traditions. So in the medieval period, Jews were frequently tavern keepers. So the idea of a Jewish tavern is not totally out of the blue. So Yankel's Tavern is a great book that kind of documents that. And then the House of Learning, the Beit Midrash, is like a traditional Jewish place of sharing of ideas. I think the innovation is like we mash those up and like, what if we took these kind of classic forms of a tavern and house of learning, and what might that look like? The vision of a Jewish future is one of like a place where Jewish life is incredibly accessible, where learning is accessible. At its core, it's where when people say like, what makes me Jewish? One of the key things they say is that I learn. So we're creating a space where that can happen, and that kind of identity transformation can move from someone who just might feel like they're tangentially related to Judaism, maybe know some Jewish people, to someone where it moves to where they say like, oh, I'm deeply connected to the Jewish community. One of the ways that I'm connected to the Jewish community is that I learn.
So then let's go on to what it is right now in your location in Somerville, which, by the way, is like near Cambridge, which is near Boston for people who...
It's effectively in Boston to everybody who's a little less into the fine distinctions. It's effectively in Boston.
Yeah. And we have all the same liquor laws and restaurant code laws as Boston. So yeah, 100%.
Well, then everybody's going to be immediately situated because they're very familiar with the Boston liquor laws. So when you walk into Lehrhaus, what do I see? What do I experience? What kind of a place is it?
Yeah, so I think that all the immediate visual cues, it feels like a bar or a restaurant, right? We have a large bar with a really nice back bar, tables and chairs. And so like that immediate cue is like, oh, I'm in a familiar like kind of space that I understand, like it's a bar restaurant. But then you start looking a little bit closer, and there are things that might be a little bit different. So we have no televisions, but we have bookshelves. So surrounding the space, it's about 3,000 books, all Jewish books, everything ranging from religious texts, Talmuds, to cookbooks and graphic novels. We have a small vinyl collection, philosophy, literature. And so like that's like one kind of key cue that like, oh, this place is actually very different. And then we have a Beit Midrash space. We have like a small study space where people are taking classes or learning. So that cues you to that something is very different. We have like a lounge space where you can sit and read for a while or connect with people. So there are all these kind of like the immediate impact is that, oh, this is a space that I know. I understand the rules of it. It's like a restaurant. It's a bar. There's a menu. There's a host. And then you start going deeper and you start getting like all these different cues that, oh, this space is actually more than that.
My own relationship to Lehrhaus, I want to be fully honest. I was a Lehrhaus skeptic when I first heard about this here place of yours. I saw some articles starting to pop up. I don't know, I think it was like a year before you actually existed. There started to be whispers of this funky new combo restaurant and Jewish studies space in Boston. What's it going to be? And I have grown jaded about some Jewish restaurants that I have encountered that I think don't do the best job feeling richly, deeply Jewish, as opposed to just having a really surface level kind of shtick. And I'm here for shtick. I like shtick. I'm like ready to go to a deli that just has some like pun names related to Ashkenaziness. That's fine with me. But I also pine for more. And when I walked into Lehrhaus, and it was actually like a period of seconds, not even minutes or hours, within a period of seconds of actually walking in, I was no longer a skeptic. I was very much on board, because the first things I encountered, I mean, Dan was asking what it's like when you walk in. I mean, yeah, it's a restaurant. It feels like a restaurant. There's also like nice couches and sitting area on one side that maybe we'll come back to, that's like a good place to work during the day, even when it's not fully operating as a restaurant. But I walked in, there was a biography of Emma Goldman peering at me. Emma Goldman.
And that's how you win Lex's heart.
That is a direct route. But it wasn't just that it was a biography of Emma Goldman staring at me. It's that she was next to a bunch of Talmud texts. Like, literally my view and I think that's still like the first thing that people.
Yeah, it's like you got Emma Goldman up top, and then the Noah Talmud just like right, the whole set right underneath. Yeah.
And that 1-2 punch, I mean, it's something that I feel like is something that a lot of people want, but that very few Jewish organizations or general organizations in a Christian hegemonic world have created. That blurring of an Emma Goldman being like a classic exemplar of somebody who was deeply Jewish and Jewishness imbued her every pore. And she was certainly not a synagogue goer, very actively not so. Next to Talmud text that a lot of people who are more on the cultural Jew side or whatever, like might not be their pathway into Judaism, and blurring them together. I think that that's courageous in a world that suggests you kind of have to pick one as a Jewish organization. And it's not just like the aesthetic, it seeps into the menu, which is shaped like a Talmud, but also features like Dr. Brown's soda. And it seeps into having a place of learning, the Beit Midrash, where you can have classes 1 hour focused on, traditional texts, and the next hour something that would read as much more like Jewish history or culture that's not just about religious texts. So can you talk to us a little bit more about that juxtaposition of that which is sort of quote unquote secular, I don't love the word, and that which is religious, and how that plays into Lehrhaus?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Like one, just on the initial design note that you mentioned in terms of like the role of kitsch. So one of the things we like, my co-founder and I, Josh and I, we appreciate good kitsch, but we also want there to be more Jewish aesthetics than kitsch. A lot of Jewish spaces that aren't, a lot of Jewish restaurants, I would say, like use kitsch as a medium for conveying either a sense of Jewishness or a sense of meaning or a sense of connection or story. And again, I think that's fine. But we really pushed on the idea of like maybe there can be like a joyous, playful, but also deeply Jewish aesthetic that isn't kitsch, one that kind of hits the border of reverence and irreverence. Irreverence through reverence, I guess, is probably the closer articulation. So that's something that we thought really, really hard about. I actually had a rule early on, no puns. And then I started working with.
Oh man, that's gonna lose me before too long.
Oh no! Then I started working with bar professionals, and like bartenders love puns more than anything. so we've backed off on that a little bit, but still, like that idea of like, what is the aesthetic? How can it come from a sense of like knowledge and meaning and connection and accessibility and diversity as well? When we were first opening, I had an interview with the local Eater reporter, journalist, and she was like, "Oh, so this is a religious space, right? This is like a religious Jewish space." And I was like, "Well, I mean, those categories don't really work for Judaism, right? Like the idea of like a religious space versus a non-religious space, like I think works well when we're talking about like Protestant Christianity, but I don't think it actually works well for Jews, right? Because like, yeah, Judaism's a religion, but it's also a culture, and it's also, it's so much more. It's a people. And so, Lex, I think what you're touching on is like that idea of like, what we're trying to project here and we're trying to create is a place where the best of Judaism can be put forward. So it's an expansive space that thinks of Judaism as a religion, but also as much more than a religion. So, and I think my gut is like that's kind of what you're touching on. It's hard to get that right all the time, and I'm sure we've messed up and we'll continue to mess up, but like that's what we're shooting for.
What's powerful is, I think Lehrhaus, and this is true of all sorts of restaurants, it's not unique necessarily to you, but different people going to Lehrhaus could experience it as different of those things. I mean, yeah. I have a friend who lives half a mile from where your restaurant is in Somerville. He is Jewish. He spends almost zero time in synagogue spaces or other kinds of classic institutional Jewish spaces. And I'm not going to say but, and he actually does like occasional kinds of interesting Jewish programming when they're meaningful, when they're comfortable, and this is really important with Lehrhaus, when they don't feel like they're in a deeply altered space from where you might be socially otherwise. Like, he actually reached out to me, my friend who never goes to Jewish stuff. He sent me a note and was like, hey, there's this like Jewish tavern. I don't know if he knew about the Beit Midrash. Like, there's this Jewish restaurant in Somerville. You should come up and go. Like, this is our excuse this time to hang out with each other. And I was like, sick, great. Like, this is not somebody. And then not only that, I taught at Lehrhaus a couple times. He did come partially because it was me, but like, I don't know that he, and also his non-Jewish partner, I don't know that they would have come to me teaching in a synagogue space near them or in other, like, it's just comfy, and it doesn't feel like a deep barrier. It doesn't feel like you're taking a big risk going. When I've taught classes there, it's been only slight majority Jewish versus non-Jews in the space. My sense is there's probably a similar dynamic with those going to the restaurant. Can you talk to us just about how part of the magic here is that you've created a Jewish space that, like, yes, it's Jewish, but it's also just a nice place to hang out and be social with people that non-Jews actually enjoy spending time in too?
Yeah. There's a great book from the 60s called Personal Space by Robert Summer. He's also the guy who did like kind of early work in psychedelic space design. So set and setting is a term that he invented, came up with. But in this book, Personal Space, there's a chapter called Design for Drinking. And it talks about how if you're from the same cultural milieu as a bar restaurant that you're entering, you know the rules. You know how to behave, you know, like where you can sit, you know, that if you if you buy something, you can sit for a certain period of time, you know, that if you sit at the bar, you know, there's like a higher expectation of talking to strangers, right? So there's like all of these like encoded cultural rules in a space like a bar or a restaurant. The advantage that Lehrhaus has is that the way we've constructed it, so it has all of these cues, means that people feel super comfortable entering. They know roughly the rules. You know, I'm a synagogue person. I belong to more synagogues than I want to say, but you need to know a tremendous amount to enter a synagogue, right? You need to know what to wear, what time to show up, what to put on your head, what to put on your body, what book to take, when to stand, when to sit. There's like a lot of things that you need to really know and be encoded in culturally. Whereas, like, again, if you're from the same broader cultural milieu as a bar restaurant, like, you know that you can just enter and you know you can sit down and you know you can order something. We're also playing into like things that some people do anyway. We're an institution that's part of people's normal schedule, right? Like, people go out to eat. It's something that they do. Where are we going to go to eat tonight? The options are this, and this. And there's there's this cool Jewish tavern option as well. Very few people, I mean, I might be one of these people, but very few people are like, where are we going to go learn tonight? You know, like, what are the classes that I want to attend tonight? And it just doesn't happen. But once we kind of meld those two things together, then it's like, oh, like, where do you want to go to eat tonight? Let's go to this tavern. Oh, there's like a class on the history of Kugel, right? Or the secret Jewish history of punk, or like this interesting like thing called the Talmud, right? All of a sudden, like, those encounters become more feasible. And you know, Lex, what you mentioned, we encounter a lot of like people who are not as deeply connected to the organized Jewish community wanting to come and bring their friends, Jewish and non-Jewish, to a space so that they can express that element of their identity. We also see it in like the reverse, where we see a lot of non-Jewish partners bringing their Jewish partners, saying like, oh, there's this space that expresses an element of your identity that I know is important to you. Let's go and see what this is like together. And then like there's like this amazing continuum as well in terms of how you can encounter the space. So, you know, you can book a time with one of our learning guides to do a chavruta, to do some paired learning with them, or you can come to a class, or you can just like show up and have a drink at the bar. But even when you show up and have a drink at the bar, all of our mixed drinks have like incredibly deep Jewish stories. We talk about Jewish storytelling as a hallmark of our approach to hospitality. So our front of house, our bartending staff are all excited to tell stories. Not that they're like always doing this, but like when the opportunity opens up, you can actually have like some pretty deep Jewish encounters in the space, even if you're just there for a drink.
Yeah, so just to describe one element of that for our listeners, and you've mentioned it, but on your menu, it's set up like a page of Talmud. And for folks who have seen the Talmud, you know that there are these like interpretations or commentaries along the edges of the page of Talmud, and you have that for the mixed drinks and for the food menu. And it sounds like you can ask your server for an expansion on these stories, but you can also just like look at the little explanations and stories even on the page of the menu. So there's a lot of bringing of the Jewish technologies, I guess, into a new format as well.
I frequently try to take menus away from people because, when their food comes out and there's always kind of like a tugging where like they actually want to keep them to look at them a little bit longer to be learning the menu.
Well, that's what I wanted to go to a little bit more, because I'm curious. I want to kind of understand more deeply the things that are happening or that are available at Lehrhaus beyond coming there for a meal or for a drink. So you've kind of alluded to some of them, but just again to paint the picture, there's this, we described that you come in and to your left, kind of in front of you, there's this restaurant and bar part. To your right, there's this lounge where a lot of the books are. But then in the back of that, there's this room, which is the study room, essentially. There's a big table and a lot more books. I'm wondering if you could talk about, I guess, how Lehrhaus is not just a restaurant with Jewish book decor. There's other things happening there. And could you tell us about some of the things that happen there in a kind of organized way, like the things that are part of what you're providing or making happen, as opposed to the more serendipitous things that people are doing when they enter the space?
Yeah. Well, the serendipitous things are designed as well. So it's like, we're trying to create a built environment where Jewish learning happens in lots of different ways. We run classes almost every night, sometimes twice a night, occasionally 3 times a night. That's pushing it. And those are everything from classical Jewish texts to history to philosophy. We have an upcoming class on actually the Lehrhaus School of Wine. We've done Scotch and kind of interplaying like the roles of Jewish communities and history and law in these spirits and foods. The broader kind of pedagogic frame is, we like to say, as much as possible, one text, one person, lots of ideas. We really wanted to kind of push our teachers to focus on one text, and you can bring another text to explain that text, but kind of that modality. And like if it's Jewish and it's a text, we'll probably teach it. That's the kind of other go-to frame.
And when you say we'll teach it, who's the we here? Do you have a teaching staff, or do you have a person who's like a coordinator and you bring in people? Like who teaches there?
So we have content partnerships with a few local and national institutions. So Hebrew College, Hartman, and Hadar. So they all do some teaching. But then we also like go pretty wide. So we have Molly Schumann is our assistant director for the House of Learning. So we have, if you guys watch any restaurant shows, we have front of house staff, back of house staff, and then House of Learning staff. That's kind of how we divide it up.
So learning is the right and left of, like, I'm thinking about direction. So the front of house, the back of house, and as we turn right and left, we're always surrounded by learning to complete the 4 directions. That's my drash on these.
Yeah. So it's good drash. The challenge with that is that like the world doesn't work in strict binaries, right? Like each staff has like a different role to play. So the back of house staff is the one who are putting food up and producing food. The front of house staff are the ones who are serving and interacting with guests. The House of Learning staff are the one who are facilitating, coordinating learning activities at Lehrhaus. But like in the same way, the back of house can't function without the front of house, and the front of house can't function with the back of house. Like the House of Learning can't function either, and same is true with the front of house and back of house. So like the more we can kind of like think of it as like different instruments in a band or in a symphony, right? That together, like we're able to produce like a glorious sound. So yeah, so we also recruit teachers and think hard about what the diversity of voices who are teaching and topics are. We're working with our partners, but then we're also thinking about who in the area, who's coming through, what are the kind of ideas that we want to present, what are the texts that we feel like we want to present. So there, we also do like a lot of recruiting and curation of teaching and text as well. There's those classes. Then we have what we call Sunday school, which is like kind of Sunday morning, afternoon, a larger scale, usually lectures. And then we have like this kind of like this approach is like a personal trainer for a Jewish learning habit. So we have these learning guides who you can book time with to either continue like maybe Jewish learning that you had been doing before, or just get oriented and like kind of like start that process of shifting from someone who doesn't learn to someone who identifies as a learner.
So carrying that forward, I'm interested in talking about another side of Lehrhaus, which this is partially selfish because when I went to Lehrhaus after a couple times, I learned that there was, and I think you launched it after you started, but like there's this membership thing. You could become a member. There are not that many restaurants where, at least in my area, you can like become a member. And I think that points to the ways in which Lehrhaus is not just a restaurant. But so I became a member, and there's like an annual fee, or I forget if it's monthly or annual, whatever it is. I did one of them. And what it means is that during the day, which Lehrhaus doesn't have lunch in the same way it has dinner, but if you have a membership, you can go to Lehrhaus during the day, and it operates as kind of a lovely workspace, or you could just like have coffee with a friend there. Like there's any number of things you could do. It's quieter in the day, but I imagine that like maybe one day down the line it would be less quiet and there'd be all sorts of people there co-working or doing whatever. I use it in the way that like sometimes I go up to Boston from Providence regularly, and it's actually like I'm now treating Lehrhaus as like, okay, when I'm in Boston for the day, it's kind of my home base, which just serves a practical purpose. But it's not just practical. It's that I like being in that zone, being able to turn to my left or right and like page through whatever book is on the shelf or on the table that day. So can you talk to us a little bit about that membership idea?
Yeah, so it's exactly like you said, Lex, that we have this membership model which enables you to use Lehrhaus during the daytime. We do have like pastries and now like a nice like protein bowl that you can order. When we were first conceptualizing it, we're like, this is like going to be a great way to like both like maximize the space, right? Like we want to get as much out of the space as we can, and like a great way to do like all sorts of like different types of learning experiences, right? Once you have that kind of core group of members, then those one-on-one experiences, pushing people along like a ladder of kind of engagement, it kind of works differently because there's a higher level of buy-in. Our initial kind of hypothesis was that people will want to use the space solely as a co-working space. We're less expensive than many other co-working spaces. There's like, it's a more casual environment, like that was like our thought. Then we started talking to people who've become members, and there's a lot that like who are there because they need a space that's not home and not the office, or they do all remote work. But what's like come out is like that people, one of the main reasons people join is because they want to feel part of a community, right? So they want to feel like that they want to use the space, but they also want to feel like they're part of what's going on at Lehrhaus in a deeper way. And so like a lot of the work that we're doing around membership now is like both like making sure that we are a great space for people to drop in and do some work, grab a cup of coffee, meet with a friend, like all that stuff. And we're starting to think much harder about, okay, so we have these people who are thirsty for community in this way, and what are the types of things that we can do to enhance that feeling and amplify it.
It's this question about if we're creating new institutions in Jewish life. One of the reasons that I think it's worth trying to create new institutions in Jewish life is that the economic model for a lot of the existing Jewish institutions is broken. It's not really sustainable, especially long term, and we're seeing that in the synagogue world, in the JCC world, and in other spaces. It feels to me like everything I know about the restaurant world, which admittedly is minimal, I've heard that it's a low-margin business. And so if the idea is, hey, we've got this amazing idea, we're going to create a new kind of Jewish organization that is funded through being a restaurant, probably that's not your model. So I'm curious, it feels like the membership may be a step in that direction. And I'm just sort of wondering if you could give us a sense of like what a place like Lehrhaus needs in terms of revenue sources to be able to exist and be the kind of organization that you're trying to create.
Rather than frame it as like a restaurant that like for a new type of organization that like supports itself through earned dollars to the restaurant, I'd rather think about it as like this is like an incredibly impactful organization with a tremendous amount of reach that doesn't cost a lot of money year over year to achieve a high level of impact because of the way it's structured, right? So we're a 501c3 that owns an LLC, but we function as a not-for-profit. Our design is that after like a large, but not, compared to other brick and mortar institutions, not incredibly large, like initial building cost, that year over year, we want the revenue from the tavern to cover between 70 and 80% of our total operating costs. We've made some strategic decisions that limit the amount of revenue that we can make. Like the study is a great example. It enables us to really fulfill our philanthropic mission, But it means that, like, the space that we're in now in Somerville was a restaurant, and it was just tables and chairs everywhere, because that's your highest path to revenue, is just more seats, right? To make our space accessible to like all sorts of different types of Jewish people, we've decided to make it kosher. It's challenging to generate revenue on the nights where, in general, restaurants and bars do their most amount of revenue. So on Fridays and Saturdays, on Shabbat. So the model is that, like, we'll always need some level of philanthropic support, but if you compare it to other brick and mortar institutions with a similar amount of impact and reach, it's significantly lower after initial building cost. That number goes even farther if we can find ways to get ownership of the space that we're in, if we're no longer paying rent. So the general idea is, like, not that we will cover all of our costs, but that we'll achieve like a very, very high level of philanthropic efficiency.
But let's add the membership piece to that and maybe other ideas, because I'm just wondering too, beyond the revenue that comes in from being a restaurant, in other words, creating a product that people are known to pay for, like food. I feel like the membership also represents an interesting model where I think it's not like membership in a synagogue where you're paying a really quite large amount of money to be part of the synagogue, whatever that means exactly. Some people are very, very involved, and obviously it's clear what membership means for them. But for a lot of people that don't go to a synagogue very often, if you think about how much they're paying in membership dues, it feels like it's hard to, first of all, it's hard to imagine that continuing for all that much longer. But second of all, you really try to get into, well, what are they getting out of that? And some people really are getting out of it a sense of community, and it matters to them to be part of it, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of people aren't, and feels like that's not going to last, whereas what you're talking about is a much lower cost type of membership that in principle could be available to more people. And if I'm understanding it correctly, it's really membership. I mean, it's really people that are using the space in ways that are serving them in deep ways. And that represents an interesting kind of economic model. And I'm curious what your dreams are for, like, what percent of the model that's going to be, as opposed to revenue from like donations and philanthropy.
Yeah, I think as we build out what membership at Lehrhaus means, there's a significant upside potential. The modeling that we have right now, like always has some level of philanthropic support, and depending on market and real estate kind of details, like that number could go up or down. I don't see membership. First of all, I don't see Lehrhaus as a synagogue alternative. Like there's lots of things that synagogues do that we don't do, right? I see it as a touchstone or a point of contact of a Jewish identity, connection, learning, like all of those things, and a place to kind of further all of those elements. Like Judaism is put into the public square in some key ways, in ways that not all synagogues are able to do. But in no way do I see this as a synagogue alternative.
Just to throw a wrinkle, I will say, like, I think I'm in the minority. But I want to throw out there that I think I am kind of a member of Lehrhaus as an alternative to, like, I'm not a member of synagogues in my area. I don't say that as a value positive or value negative thing. I don't connect with them, and I certainly don't connect with them to the degree that the money would cost. And I do think that we don't say this a lot because it's kind of sad, but a lot of the reason people are synagogue members is not actually to, like, receive deep services in their life. It's that they want to be a person that is a member of a Jewish thing, because if they weren't, they would feel like they are discarding Jewishness or Judaism. I think subconsciously I have that to some degree, and I think being a member of Lehrhaus does in fact help me feel that way. Am I, like, super common? No, but I would push back that there's not some degree in which alt spaces are holding down that alt.
The pushback I have on that is that I think that once life cycle events kind of come into it, I think that's when people realize that they need, if not a synagogue, a rabbi, if not a rabbi, someone who has like some level of presence and ability to like hold spiritual space, right? So when people are in the position where they need to bury a loved one or get married, or figure out coming of age ceremonies. Like I just like those are things that like I'm trained to do, and it's been actually, I like to say I've done more funerals since starting Lehrhaus than I ever did in my rabbinic career before because of those needs. But like synagogues, or at least rabbinic presence, I think are like kind of like the ideal spaces for those to happen. So I think you're right in terms of like connection to Jewish community, but I think there are kind of like these core functions, right, that we're not designed to cater to.
I think we do disagree on this, but like the fact that it does not surprise me that you've been asked to do yourself those life cycle events.
Yeah.
And I would also note that like all of those life cycle events, the trend lines are that people are seeking out pathways to them that are separate from those classic kinds of synagogues. I'm not here to say like there's no space for synagogues. I want to give a shout to the people for whom, we have a t-shirt on our website that says the deli is my synagogue.
Yeah.
It sells pretty well. We said the deli and not Lehrhaus. I think it operates similarly. Like it's a joke and it's cute, but I actually think there are people for whom Lehrhaus might be serving that kind of role, and I don't want it to sound to our listeners like there's not room for that.
Yeah. Early on in Lehrhaus, we had 4 or 5 people come in, and they all had like the ribbon that they'd just come from a funeral of an immediate family member, like the torn black ribbon, which is the custom of Kriya of ripping, of tearing, which is kind of one of the kind of first moments of mourning in Judaism. I asked them like who they lost, and they lost a sister. And I was like, I expressed my sympathies, and I was just curious. I was like, I'm glad that you're here, but I'm curious, like, why? And they're like, well, we wanted to commemorate this moment in some Jewish way, and we didn't really know how. So we're starting here with drinks, and then we're going to Mamala's, the Jewish deli, like kind of like down the street for dinner. And so like, I mean, and that's exactly what you're articulating, is like people wanting to find Jewish space, not knowing where to get it. And then like, the deli is like a great example, or a restaurant like Lehrhaus, where it's like, oh, this goes back to what low barriers mean. We know how to enter these spaces. We know that this is a space we can kind of be. And like one of the nice things about Lehrhaus is like also like one of those spaces that like actually has rabbinic presence. So then you can get your fill there as well.
I mean, I've joked about this. It's not really a joke, but a synagogue's version of membership is, in my view, kind of the way that a gym membership works, which is it only works economically if most people don't go to the gym. If everybody who was a member who paid membership dues to a gym went to the gym would be overwhelmed and wouldn't be able to serve people. And so it's a kind of a weird, it's almost like an insurance model where it depends on a lot of people paying and not a lot of people using. That's not what synagogue people like to say, because it doesn't sound great, but it is the reality of the business model. Whereas a membership model like a WeWork, where it says, hey, we're actually charging you a pretty low amount. The amount that we're charging you is actually a fair exchange for the value that you would receive. When you're talking about something more like a WeWork co-working space, Lehrhaus, a lower cost membership model feels like a great model to me. So that's where I was just trying to sort out that I think when in a Jewish context, people hear the word membership, they're thinking like $3,000 and I never go. Whereas, the Lehrhaus is not $3,000 and people do go.
Yeah, $36 a month.
Yeah, that sounds better to me.
You should sign up, Dan.
It's also subtly rebellious in a different direction, not towards synagogues, but towards an ecosystem of Jewish organizations that for a long time said, we actively don't have membership. Having membership creates certain kinds of in-crowds and out-crowds. It's actively a problem. Having membership in today's Jewish world, in a certain sense, is kind of a countercultural move when there's been so much... we could go through things like Hillel, things like Moishe House, that like there's like a whole world of organizations, and this is fine. Like I'm not saying this is wrong either. There's different models for different contexts, but like they have actively said we don't have members at all, and being a member is the wrong way to think about this. This is something that you just as a person you go to, you use, but you're not becoming affiliated in the same way. So it's notable, I think.
Yes, and like one of our core functions is that of a bar restaurant where you don't have to be a member to come, right? Like everyone's welcome.
I'm curious about the future, and I mean that expansively. So there's like what we've been talking about one location primarily. Not every location necessarily would have a specific Emma Goldman welcome. I'm curious about whether the dream, and my sense is that it is that you would have Lehrhaus in a bunch of other cities. And I'm also curious about a different kind of question, which is not what you specifically and Lehrhaus would do, but the kinds of things that other people would do inspired by you. So I hope Lehrhaus grows to dozens of cities and my own city in Providence. I also think that what Lehrhaus is doing is not just about itself. It's setting a precedent for a Jewish project organization that serves people, Jews and non-Jews, and is just sort of public facing and not seen as like a Jewish communal institution in the same way. So like, I kind of think that if somebody in Baltimore or Tennessee or Texas or California looked at you and was like, I'm not a restaurant person, but I'm going to make the Jewish mini golf course that's a little bit of kitsch, but actually looks deeper and asks questions about like, oh, Jews and golf are not historically seen as intertwined. And what does that reflect? And we're going to have decor that explores this. We're going to have, design on the whole that connects to different Jewish and golf questions. Like, you could have this for any number of public recreation activities or eating or whatever that, like you said, are things people already do but haven't been inflected Jewishly. So my two-part question is basically, how do you understand the Lehrhaus future specifically and potential expansion? And more broadly, what might you hope to inspire in other respects by other people?
Our concept with Lehrhaus was that if it works in Somerville, then it can probably work in other places. And so right now we're kind of imagining what Lehrhouses across the country might look like. And we're actively working to build one in Washington, D.C. right now. When we were kind of doing our initial organizational identity work, the Ace Hotel was one of our kind of core comps. The Ace Hotel is a hotel chain that has like an overarching brand identity, but then like thinks really hard about what it means to be in a certain city and making sure that the identity of the hotel also reflects that city. When we go to different cities, there'll be an overarching sense of Lehrhaus self, and we want it to pick up on some of those core identities of the city. We want Lehrhouses everywhere. We want everyone to be able to access this type of Jewish experience. And in terms of like what Lehrhaus might inspire, there's a lot of talk about like what like third space or third places, and I think there's very few actually real ones. And I think that like we've achieved it in some key ways, like a space that is neither home nor work, that people want to spend time in. When we're doing well, we feel like the perfect combination of a bar, a restaurant, and a Beit Midrash and Kiddush. Like the after synagogue schmoozing, talking to people. You get these moments.
Instead of a shul with a pool, it's a shul with a mule, like a Moscow mule.
Well, in order to have a Moscow mule, we'd have to have a good Jewish story. So tell me the Jewish story of a Moscow mule.
We'll find it.
And we might, we talk really hard about the difference between Jewish food and food Jews eat. But like more than like whatever, like an ecosystem of Jewish third, spaces, we want to inspire a Jewish aesthetic that is joyful and playful, a little bit irreverent, and deeply, deeply connected to our tradition and our content. So that's one. Two, we want to inspire people to like go deeper into Jewish learning and be like, wow, the Jewish world is more vast than I thought. It's Emma Goldman and the Talmud. It's Bertha Pappenheim and Zohar Al-Fassia. It's Dr. Brown's and Dafina, right? So really kind of projecting this idea of a deep and diverse Jewish world, and one that has like a tremendous amount of value in engaging in. We want the spaces and the learning and the experiences that people have to be outstanding. And then also like the weird ways we've impacted the non-Jewish world has been interesting. I'm a huge fan of amba. It's an amazing Jewish condiment. It's like a fermented mango chutney with like fenugreek. It's like funky and delicious. It comes from the Baghdadi Jews of India, so they kind of fell in love with this mango sauce in India. They brought it to Iraq with them. Became popular all over Iraq, and then when most of the Iraqi Jews were forced to leave Iraq, it kind of came with them to Israel and became an integral part of the sabich sandwich, which is eggplant and amba and a pita. So we use amba. It's a great Jewish story. It's a great Jewish story of migration. There's like unlike foodways or ports, so like kind of finding the origins of food can be hard, but this one like has like a very kind of key Jewish story to it. We're all amba all the time, and then lo and behold, just a couple of weeks ago, a restaurant opened, not run by Jews, not run by Israelis, in Cambridge called Amba, right? And so I was like, what's going on here? I talked to our GM, and it's great, creating an Amba ecosystem. And he's like, oh yeah, like I know that guy who was really interested in Lehrhaus when we first opened. I'm sure he probably knew about Amba beforehand, but like, I like to think that we're helping inspire like a small Amba boom here, at least in the Boston area.
That actually connects to what I've been thinking about in terms of, as we arc toward the conclusion of this conversation. I'm curious about the kind of growth edges for Lehrhaus, and I'm thinking about how you probably can correct me about this, but like my sense is that Lehrhaus is amazing on the food. That you've like made a real commitment to having awesome food and awesome drinks, and you've hired the right chef. I don't know who. I remember reading something about how the chef was an award-winning, chef, and that you've just really nailed the food, which I think is so important because my sense of what you're saying and what I'm trying to say and what I think that we're wishing there would be more of in the Jewish world is that like people aren't going to come to Jewish things if they're not outstanding. I think we've had for a long time a sense that people, actually they would come if it wasn't outstanding because there was anti-Semitism driving them to it, or because they weren't accepted in other social clubs, or whatever reason. They're like, oh, the Jewish thing is not so great, but it's what I have and I like the people and I'm going to stick around. And that doesn't feel like that's the same anymore. And so nailing the food and nailing the ambiance feels extremely critical, not only for Lehrhaus, but in terms of symbolically what that would mean for all the other organizations out there. Like, how do you make the experience that you're offering amazing? I'm curious about whether on the other elements of Lehrhaus, you would say, we could do even better. And I'm wondering in terms of what you're seeing in terms of the people who are taking advantage of the other parts of Lehrhaus, the learning parts, the lounge, the books, the whatever. Like, are there ways where you would say, if we had the capacity to invest in that the way that we've been able to invest in the food, here's what we would do differently, or here's what we would want to know, so that not only the people would come for the food and stay for the Jewish, but like there would be more and more people coming for the Jewish and having some great snacks while they were there.
Yeah, I would say like we haven't nailed anything, and that drift towards mediocrity is real and something that has to be like really pushed against. I think one of the ones that I'm most curious about is how we make Chavruta partnered learning of Jewish texts a normative practice, right? How we teach it to people and how we move them from people who are who've been taught this approach to people who practice it regularly in their lives. And there's great organizations, doing work in this area. In a space like a bar, restaurant, Beit Midrash, like a Jewish Tavern, House of Learning, what are the pedagogies where that's really impactful? On the classroom side, there's a huge range of like the learning experiences and types of teachers and types of people who come through the door, and so like really kind of figuring out and tightening up like that stuff. Like it's always going to be a work in progress.
Again, I'm interested in this question of Lehrhaus as a new kind of institution in the Jewish community, and you have relationships with Hebrew College, with Hartman, and with Hadar. And what strikes me about those is Hebrew College is an organization based in Boston. Hadar and Hartman are organizations that have people in different cities in America and that come from this kind of national or international organization that, in the case of Hadar is pretty religious, in the case of Hartman is pretty focused on Israel. I'm wondering whether an organization like Lehrhaus, its kind of Jewish content focus is sort of dependent on the existence of these other institutions out there that are able to provide that content. And that opens up a gap for people like me, like probably Lex. I mean, that say like, I don't want that. I'm not interested in that kind of Jewish learning. I'm interested in secular Jewish learning, or I'm interested in pop culture Jewish learning, or whatever. And my sense, just from the fact that you had Lex come and teach about the Apocrypha, is that the way that you're handling that is by bringing sort of a variety of individual people that you find, but that feels like that requires a lot of work on your end to find those people. So I guess I'm wondering, like, is the future for Lehrhaus and for an organization like Lehrhaus that ultimately, again, getting back to the economics, maybe like it needs more money in order to be able to have your own learning department, your own staff in a certain way that's able to supplement like what's available from these larger Jewish organizations, or is there a different model?
One of the key metaphors that we use in terms of our content right now is that we think of ourselves, similar to Netflix. So we're producing content and we're distributing content. At this point, like the mix is actually really more to producing content and to like, finding those teachers, cultivating those teachers in those relationships. But then we are also distributing, from national organizations. We want to make sure that the types of things that we are offering are diverse enough that, Lex might want to show up. Dan, you might want to show up at some point. The person who's like never experienced Judaism might want to show up. We're only as good as last week's, classes. There's continually like a good mix of topics, a good mix of teachers. And there's like areas that we can grow in, because again, it's continually work in progress. But yeah, I mean, this is a difficult, time intensive endeavor that requires a lot of work. Those things are all true.
So I've got a very practical question, but I think it opens up bigger things. But Shabbat, you mentioned it. It's hard to be a restaurant and not do business on Friday night through Saturday night. Not being open then has some major advantages in terms of accommodating certain folks from certain Jewish communities. And it also has the drawbacks of, like, for people that when they go out on Friday and Saturday, it's less likely that they would find their way to Lehrhaus. Is that something that will be true in every city that you go to? Or is that something that you see as maybe there are certain places where that's more and less of a fit? And there might be certain places where being open Davka, specifically Friday and Saturday, would be significant enough for that community that you would make that choice. So like, that's just sort of like, I'm curious what your answer is. And if you don't have like big elaborate thoughts, but just sort of a practical answer, that's fine. The second question I have is about your relationship to other projects that are open on Friday night and Saturday. I mean, I think in ecological ways. I use the word ecosystem all the time. I think about different places filling different niches. From my perspective, okay, Lehrhaus isn't open on Shabbat. There are a lot of places in Boston and Somerville and Cambridge owned by Jews or that have a little bit of Jewish tinge to them. I can speak better to Providence than I can to Boston, but like there's a number of places where like they have challah available on Fridays, but they haven't really thought about being or having a Jewish aesthetic. I'm curious if you've done any thinking about like, okay, so we're not going to be open on Shabbat, but we're going to partner with organizations in the community that are and sort of coach them up or help them think about how they could take the challah on their shelf, or there happens to be an ice cream shop nearby that's vegan and also has a mitzvah board where people just post like nice little things. Like it's not known as a Jewish place, but they have a little mitzvah board. Have you thought about like coaching up or consulting with some of those orgs about how they might get a little thicker or deeper in how they approach their Jewish sides?
Yeah, so Shabbat is like it's a challenge we're trying to crack. And in terms of the kosher question, right now, Lehrhaus as a kosher establishment is built into the DNA. We see it from an accessibility perspective about like who's able to come into the space, making Lehrhaus one of the few spaces that a diversity of Jews feel welcome. There are ways that we could do service on Shabbat. We're a dairy pescatarian restaurant, and in order to succeed, I mean, there's kind of like the economics of it like don't work out in terms of like perceived value and price point. And what we're trying to figure out is like, what are ways that we can make it worthwhile for our staff to show up for a shift, right? Generate enough revenue like with through prepaid experiences and have like a high quality experience. Like there are ways that we could be open on Shabbat. We just haven't been able to figure out the economic model that works for it. There's a great line in the Talmud, Tafasta Rebello Tafasta, that if you try to do everything, it's as if you've done nothing. There are organizations like One Table comes to mind whose sole purpose is like training up people and organizations and establishment about how to make Shabbat a powerful experience, right? And bringing people together for Shabbat. We don't see that as our role, right? We see ourselves as creating vibrant gathering spaces where the best of the world can be accessible to everyone, and the mission of making the Jewish world more joyful and meaningful, through excellence in hospitality and learning. There is an angel effect that because we're able to create powerful Jewish spaces, other organizations and institutions like look to do this. So like now there's, in Cambridge, there's a Jewish deli who's doing Friday night experiences as well. And I think that comes directly from like seeing like what it's like for, to lean into the Jewishness.
I think just as a closing question, I mean, this is a little bit of a wild card, and it's basically, I'm curious what your hopes are for somebody out there. They don't live in Boston, and let's say they don't even live in one of the places that is potentially going to get a Lehrhaus. May there be 120 of them. How would you like them to think about Jewishness, what it is to be a Jewish space, a little bit differently, even if it's not about sort of Lehrhaus specifically?
I was at Lehrhaus. I was in service at Lehrhaus last night, and a guy came up to me, and he was like, The last time I was here was at Purim, and Purim was our 1 year anniversary, and we did like a massive Purim party. We were lucky enough to have Frank London up to play. We got a noise complaint call from our neighbor who's a tapas bar. So it's like, we knew we were doing it right when the tapas
You've
bar.
done it. Like Purim, that should be a new halakha of Purim. Like if you don't get a noise complaint, like it's kind of like not knowing the difference between Mordechai and Haman. You have to reach the point where you get a noise complaint.
Yeah. It was definitely felt like a high point. And he's like, thank you, because like I really needed that experience of just joyous Judaism and like a joy associated with Judaism. And on any given night, like that's really what you can experience at Lehrhaus, is like all of these different types of people coming in and experiencing like the depth and the challenges and the complexity of being Jewish in the world right now together in this like kind of powerful, joyous way. So I guess like the takeaway is like find those moments of joy in Judaism and pursue them and relish them and savor them and try and create more of them for yourself and other people.
Thank you so much, Charlie Schwartz, for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you for inviting me. It's such a pleasure.
And thanks so much to all of you out there for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and we hope that you'll tune in again in the future. A reminder, we've got our 12-month-long, our year-long Kabbalat Shabbat service called Shabbat Unbound that is underway. Our next gathering is in just a couple weeks on November 22nd. We hope that you'll join us. You can sign up at judaismunbound.com/Shabbat, and we hope that you will. It's been an incredible journey so far, and we're excited for the remainder of our year-long service. We also, of course, want to encourage you to be in touch with us with any questions, ideas, visions you have for the Jewish future. All of that is super welcome. You can be in touch in any of the following ways. First, there's our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All of those are at Judaism Unbound for our handles. There's our website, judaismunbound.com, where you can find show notes for this episode and all sorts of other goodies. There's our email addresses, dan@judaismunbound.com or lex@judaismunbound.com. And we're also deeply appreciative if you're able to support us financially with either a monthly recurring gift or a one-time donation at judaismunbound.com/donate. So thank you so much for listening. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.